My mother abandoned me, took all my savings, then suddenly called asking me to pay $2. Whoa, for her husband's stepdaughter's dorm room. My phone suddenly buzzed when I was in bed, minding my own business. It was my mother. I hadn't heard from her in months. So what did she have to say? She didn't say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Instead, she got right to the point. She needed $2,000 for my stepsister's dorm fees. Yes, you read it correctly. She didn't even check in, just made an abrupt demand for money. Backstory. Why this is a big deal. Before you pass judgment, please allow me to explain why this is such a significant event. This isn't a typical family request. When I was 16, my mother married Mark, her new husband, and it was brutally obvious that he had no interest in me. Mark had two children of his own. Noah, 14, Lily, now 17. They were treated like gold from the time they entered the picture. Almost immediately, my mother began acting as if I did not exist. I understand that mixing families can be difficult, but she didn't even attempt to make it work. The stolen college fund. When I graduated from high school, my grandparents graciously gave me $22,000 to help with my future. It was the first time I had truly felt free. On top of that, I had saved another $2,000 from my part-time work, giving me a $24. Cushion for college, or whatever came next. Then one day, I looked into my bank account. Every single cent was gone. I confronted my mother, convinced that it must have been an error. She was still a co-owner of my account, because I hadn't transferred it over yet. She looked me straight in the eyes, without a sign of guilt, and said she had taken everything. Her reason? It was my punishment for not respecting her new husband and their children. Or at the very least, some ambiguous crap she cooked up on the moment. I lost it. She had treated my future as if it were nothing. That money was for college, my life, and she just took it. So I did the only sensible thing. I packed my bags and moved in with my grandparents, the only people who seemed to be concerned about what I was going through. What happens after that? I seldom spoke with my mother. Years later, she crawls back. Move forward a few years. I just graduated college and am still trying to figure out my life. My mother called unexpectedly. Why? To ask for $2,000 to help Lily pay for her private dorm room? It appears that living with a roommate would be too difficult for her. Seriously. What 17-year-old wants a private dorm room? What happened to just coping with your roommate like everyone else? I did not even hesitate. No way. Not happening. The guilt trip begins. And how did she respond? No is not something you can say. We are family. Are you really going to refuse to help? She seldom asked how I was doing. We hadn't spoken in months, yet she treated me like I was some kind of ATM, just useful for money. I went straight to the monetary request, as if I owed her something. I simply hung up. I wasn't going to suffer through another guilt trip. The entitlement is unreal, to be honest. The entitlement shocks, but does not surprise me. This is not the first time she has done anything like this. I could have easily gone unnoticed after Mark entered the picture. She went above and beyond for him and his children whilst I was there. Growing up, she wasn't always this way. But the moment she married him, it was as if I did not exist. She stopped asking how I was doing, stopped attending my school events, and stopped loving. She neglected to invite me over for Christmas, after I had already moved in with my grandparents. However, guess what? She faxed the card. I hope you are doing well, Mom. Love is what it is. Nothing like we miss you or sorry for everything. Just a simple card. Her interests were looks rather than true motherhood. Now she has the audacity to call out of nowhere and ask me to finance the dorm fees for her stepdaughter. After everything she's put me through? Not sure. Not likely. To be honest, it's quite depressing. I owe them nothing after she stole my savings, left me to fend for myself, and prioritized her new family. I once wanted to be in a relationship with her. I tried to contact you back then, hoping we might work things out. Still, every time, it felt like I was talking to a brick wall. Her new family occupied her so much that she had no time for me. Despite our years of silence, she suddenly expects me to hand up $2,000 if we're close. It's annoying, but I suppose I shouldn't be shocked. Some folks don't change. They simply take and take, claiming ownership over whatever you have. But I have learned my lesson. I'm no longer that defenseless child, letting her walk all over me. I've moved on, started my own life, and I'm not going to let her guilt trip me into paying for anything. Following that call, I blocked her from everything. And, to be honest, it feels as if a huge weight has been lifted. I cannot live with such negativity in my life. She will find out quickly if she tries to contact me again. I am done being courteous. After hanging up with my mother, I understood that was it. I had made myself very plain. Error. A few days later, I was just lying around, trying to enjoy my weekend, when my phone called. It was her once again. I almost disregarded it. What positive outcome may this have? But something piqued my interest, perhaps the faint hope that she had returned. Ready for a normal chat. She hadn't. With a note of smugness, she remarked, "Listen, I talked to Mark, and we came up with a new arrangement." I could almost see her patting herself on the back, as if she were about to provide me with excellent service. She went on, "Lily definitely needs a private dorm room, since sharing with others would make her uncomfortable. She apparently can only deal with shared toilets and roommates. Their great scheme? Lily would receive a lovely two-bedroom apartment with her own bathroom. And who would they like to help fund the cost? Exactly me. What is the total for the semester? $3,800. They said I should donate $1,000 spare month. For a stepsister who hardly remembers me, they asked me to pay $1,000 a month for a room I would never visit. It was so ridiculous, I almost laughed. I asked her directly, "Why is this my problem?" She immediately went into full guilt trip mode. "You never gave anything to this family. It's time you give back. You have to correct your errors." Whose mistakes? I have not even handled them in this manner. Then Mom yelled at me for living off my grandparents, as if I were a freeloader. First and foremost, my grandparents invited me to remain with them after everything I'd been through with her. They wanted to help me get back on my feet. Meanwhile, she has done far more for her real family than she has for me. In her perspective, I owe her for every little thing she has done for me. She kept underlining how much I owed them for not being a part of the family anymore, as if her driving me out was entirely my fault. She made me feel like I didn't belong. And now she's making me feel awful about leaving that mess behind. Yes, but no thanks. My rage was seething at this moment. But rather than allowing her to drag me down into this pit of guilt and manipulation, I asked her one thing. "When are you planning to pay me back the $44,000 you took from me in high school?" She flipped out the second I said it. She began screaming, calling me unappreciative and self-serving. "I did everything for you, and this is how you pay me back? Looking at the past and throwing it away, you never even recognized what I did for you." I replied plainly. "You never even apologized for stealing that money. You are the one who owes anything here." But she wasn't listening. She kept yelling about how I had abandoned the family, and how my inaction was jeopardizing Lily's future. Apparently, enrolling her at a public college with normal dorms would ruin her entire life. Sure, she will be completely fine. The truth is that she wasn't asking for aid. She demanded it. There was no please, or could you help us out. It was simply an expectation that I would comply, as if it were my obligation to clean up after their actions. And let's not even get started on Lily acting as if she's too good for the standard college experience. I made it through college while sharing a tiny room with a stranger. I'd had enough. "I'm not giving you a single penny. You can figure it out without me." Then I hung up. Once again, it felt like déjà vu. Not because of the money, but because of the overwhelming entitlement. A complete disregard for me, my life, and the limits I had established. My hands were shaking. I knew it was not over. Even as I hung up, I could see she wasn't going to let this go. My mother has always been the sort to persist until she gets her way. Later that evening, she confirmed me correct. She sent me a long, guilt-ridden text, practically an essay, about how I was tearing the family apart and how now that I'm generating money, I need to step up. As if I were some kind of prodigal child returning, expected to pay my dues. She kept insisting that I pay for my sins and start contributing to the family. Honestly, that was ridiculous. But I didn't fall for it. Her capacity to manipulate reality and make me appear like the villain was nearly astounding. Years of dealing with her manipulative behavior had prepared me for this. I wasn't about to let her shame me into paying for something that had nothing to do with me. So I blocked her. Everything, telephone, social media, and email. She attempted to contact me in every manner possible. I just couldn't handle it anymore. I didn't want to wake up every day knowing when the next guilt trip was coming. Blocking her seemed like the only way to have some peace. It wasn't simple, however. I would like to say that blocking her felt like a clean break, as if I didn't care. But a part of me does. Part of me still wishes things had gone differently. That Mom would one day truly consider me as a child rather than a walking financial account. I doubt it. I realize that's unlikely. She made her choice. I made mine. I still can't believe how brave she is. After everything she has put me through, she expects me to pay for her stepdaughter's expensive dorm room. After practically removing me from her life to focus on her real family. I will not allow her to bring me back into the circumstance. Right now, I'm living my own life and looking forward, not backward. I'm over the drama, the guilt trips, and acting as their financial safety net when money is tight. That is their problem. It is their responsibility if they cannot afford to pay their own costs. That is where I stand. I don't know if she will try to contact me again. But if she does, she'll immediately realize that I'm no longer playing along. I have more important things to think about than paying for someone else's pampered child to live in a fancy dorm. After blocking my mother, I thought that was it. My decision made obvious, and the continual strain from her calls and texts had vanished. Naturally, nothing is ever that simple for her. A few days later, just as I was feeling ready to move on, my phone lit up with a message from my Aunt Karen. Karen is the only member of Mom's family who has consistently been rational. So, I believed she was only checking in. Nope. Her message reads, "Hey, your mother has been calling me non-stop. She says you blocked her, and she's really upset. She wants to talk to you. I think you should hear her out." I about rolled my eyeballs out of my head. Hear her out? In actuality, my mother merely wanted money. But Karen has always been the sort to preserve the peace, so I wasn't surprised when she tried to mediate. What surprised me was how my mother had dragged her into this mess. I responded, "She's not offended, Karen. She's furious because I refused to give Lily money for her dorm." Karen tried to reason with me. "Maybe you should talk to her and set some boundaries." I told her unequivocally, the boundary is already set. I could tell she was uncomfortable being caught in the middle, so I tried not to vent my aggravation on her. "I'm not paying for anything, and I'm done with the guilt trips," she exhaled. "Just consider it, okay?" I assured her that I would think about it, but honestly, there was nothing else to ponder. I was not about to give my mother the satisfaction of believing she could embarrass me into doing anything. I wasn't going to succumb. A few days later, I was walking home from work when I noticed her, my mother, standing outside my apartment building, like a stalker. I had no idea how she discovered where I lived. Perhaps she hunted me down in another manner. Perhaps she received the address from Karen. Either way, she was present. She appeared irritated as if she'd come to start a brawl. I paused in my tracks. What do you say when your mother shows up unexpectedly after you blocked her? I did not have time to sort it out. "We need to talk," she began, approaching me before I could pull out my keys. I exhaled. I was already fatigued by this confrontation before it began. I nearly laughed in her face. "Fine," I said. "But if this is about money, you're not getting a dime." She crossed her arms, obviously irritated by my tone. "I didn't raise you to be so disrespectful." Respect? From the lady who took my money, put her new family ahead of me, and only called when she needed something? Is that what she's talking about? I informed her calmly. "I owe you nothing. And I definitely don't owe Lily a private dorm room." Her expression contorted with rage, as if she couldn't believe I was standing up to her. "Lily deserves this," she snapped. That is when I lost my temper. "You think I should help because I'm doing well now? Are you serious?" I was snickering. "You took my college savings when I needed it. You didn't care about my future then. And now I'm supposed to care about hers?" She tried to cut me off, but I continued. "You hardly even invite me to family gatherings these days. You replaced me. And now you think I'm going to swoop in and save the day when things get tough? Absolutely not. Remember this? I am not a member of your new family." She just stood there silently. For a while, I believed I had finally reached her, that she would realize how ludicrous it all was. But no. Instead of responding, she said, "You've always been selfish. I tried to offer you a better life, and all you've done is throw it back in my face." Selfish. After everything she had done, she had the arrogance to label me selfish. I was not going to let her alter history. I was not going to let her paint herself as a victim. "You gave me nothing," I stated forcefully. "You borrowed from me. You took my time, my money, my peace. You chose them over me. And now you're living with the consequences. Deal with it. She moved closer, attempting to scare me, but I did not back down. Her voice was chilly. You owe this family. Lily owes you, I replied. She is your daughter, not mine. That was it. I owe them nothing. At that point, I realized that our relationship was beyond repair. It wasn't only about money. It was all about control. The idea that I had constructed a life apart from her, that I was no longer under her control, and that I no longer required her approval upset her. She was searching for anything to get me back in. When I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm. Before she could say anything else, I ripped my arm free, looked her in the eye, and whispered, "Goodbye." Then I stepped into my building, leaving her standing out in the cold. She should not expect to be welcomed back. As soon as I went inside, a surge of emotions hit me: relief, resentment, and grief. It felt like I'd finally let go of something that had been weighing on me for years. Nonetheless, my mother remained with me, the woman who raised me, even if she didn't do it perfectly. Despite knowing I had done the right thing, I felt guilty. Not because I had walked away, but because I hadn't acted sooner. The truth was that I had not left my family. They'd left me behind. Later that evening, Karen texted me. What happened? I gave her the shortened version. She responded, stating she hoped we might work things out someday, even though she understood and disagreed with Mom's actions. I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. I was done. That some huge reconciliation down the line was not going to occur. Instead, I simply said, thanks. And that was all. For the first time, I acknowledged that there was nothing left to fix. For the first time in my life, I had fully prioritized myself. It was not easy, but that was the correct decision. I believed it had finally ended, that my fight with my mother outside of my flat had resolved things, that I had made it obvious. I had no intention of giving in, and I would not pay for anything. At the time, I assumed we had just had our final major blowout. Wrong. Things are never easy when you have a mother like mine. Approximately a week later, I received a call from an unknown number. Normally, I ignore them, but for some reason, I chose to respond this time. When I heard the voice on the other end, I recognized it as Mark, my stepfather. I hadn't heard from him in years, so I assumed he was trying to settle things. He was equally enraged as my mother. He did not waste time greeting people or making small talk. Instead, he launched right into accusations. So, I heard you've been disrespecting your mother. I felt my jaw tightening. My instinct was to hang up, but curiosity got the best of me. I wanted to see how far they would go with this. I kept my voice even and said, I'm not disrespecting her. I'm simply not giving her money. He gave a sarcastic laugh. I could almost hear him roll his eyes. You think this is about money? This is about family? Here we go again. You abandoned your family, and now you're neglecting Lily when she needs you. I could feel my patience slipping, but I kept my voice calm. Look, I didn't abandon anyone. You pushed me out years ago, and Lily is not my responsibility. There was a pause. For a brief moment, I hoped he'd finally understand. Of course, he didn't. You're selfish, he said, his voice full of hate. We've done everything for you, and how do you repay us? By turning your back on Lily and your mother? I almost laughed aloud. Everything? When their lovely little family was complete, they rejected me. They stole from me, neglected me, and treated me as an afterthought. I'd had enough. You did nothing for me, I responded, my voice crisp and firm. You took from me. Once you had your new family, you both acted like I didn't exist. My mother stole my money. And now, suddenly, I'm the one who's supposed to make things right. Before I could finish, he cut me off. You're not a kid anymore. It's time to stop acting like one. Family is about sacrifice. You owe this family. That word, set me off. I owe them nothing. With my patience fraying, I shot out, no, Mark. I don't owe you a damn thing. I could hear his fury increasing, but I didn't mind. They owed something. They treated me as if I were disposable for years. I was done playing nice. I was no longer that youngster who could be walked over. I was not going to sit there and let him or my mother guilt trip me into accepting responsibility for their problems. This isn't over, he added, his voice low and almost threatening, as if he hoped to terrify me into changing my decision. I did not even bother responding. We're family, he added, and we'll always be family, whether you like it or not. I hung up. And as soon as I did, I felt a sense of relief flood over me. It felt as if I'd finally closed the door on something toxic. I had drawn a line. There was no going back now. However, that was not the end of it. A few days later, I received an SMS from Lily. She was now getting involved too. Though her message was less harsh than Mark's or my mother's, there was still a lot of guilt tripping. She wrote, Hey, I know things have been tight, but I really need help with this dorm situation. I looked at the message and shook my head. Not sure why you're acting so tough about it. It's just money, and it's not like you can't afford it. It's only money. The entitlement was ridiculous. She believed I owed her something, as if I were some wealthy uncle who could afford to grant her every dream. For a time, I pondered responding. But honestly, what was the point? They had never listened before. She was not going to listen now. They were all in their own little world, and I was the villain simply because I did not satisfy their standards. So I removed the message. I also blocked her. They were never going to view things my way. No matter what I did, they saw family as a one-way street. They took. They never gave. And when I refused to give, I suddenly became the terrible person. However, they were no longer my family. Not truly. Family should be based on mutual respect, love, and support. They had none of that for me. To them, I was just a tool. Someone to manipulate with guilt until I gave them what they desired. And yes, it hurt. But I was not going to let the pain control me anymore. Once I would have done anything to get their acceptance. I just wanted to feel like I belonged. But the time has passed. I was no longer a desperate child. I'd created my own life. I did not need their approval. I did not need their approval. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about what family really meant. It's easy to get caught up in the concept that family means everything. The blood is thicker than water. However, sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones who harm you the most. And when that happens, you have to make a decision. Do you continue to let them damage you simply because they are family? Or will you walk away? Even if it means severing ties with those who should love you unconditionally. I decided to walk away. And yeah, it was difficult. But that was the correct decision. I refused to allow them to pull me down any longer. That night, as I laid in bed, I experienced something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. For once, I wasn't awaiting the next phone call, the upcoming guilt trip, the next request for money. For the first time in years, I felt liberated. And to be honest, it felt fantastic. A few weeks passed without any further problems. I was working, going out with friends, and just living my life. For the first time in a long time, everything seemed normal. Then, one day, after work, one discovered a note in my mailbox. There's no return address. Just my name on the front. At first, I considered tossing it, but something about it felt odd. So, I opened it. And guess who it came from? My mother. But this wasn't a card. This is not an apology. Not even an ordinary letter. This was a legal notice. She actually attempted to take me to court. Over what, you ask? Familial responsibilities. Apparently, Mom had concluded that I was financially liable for Lily's college fees because we are a family. And she was attempting to present it as some type of legal responsibility. As if I was obligated by law to pay for Lily's dorm. I stood there and read it. And then, I laughed out loud as I stood in my living room, holding this absurd letter. It seemed like a joke. It was so outrageous. So absurd. But this was not a joke. She had indeed consulted a lawyer. She had them prepare a full document claiming that I owed her money. The letter was full of legal language about how family must assist family and how I was morally required to step in, given my so-called success. Success? I was 23, fresh out of college, still sorting out my life, and barely able to pay my rent. She talked about me as if I was sitting on stacks of money, as if I had limitless resources and was being terrible by refusing to share them. But even if I were wealthy, if I had all the money in the world, that doesn't mean I owed them anything. Especially not after how they treated me. I immediately phoned my grandparents. They were as startled as I was. Grandfather was upset. "Don't you worry about anything," he said. They contacted a lawyer buddy who informed me there was no legal basis for what my mother was attempting. "We'll take care of this." Courts don't enforce family guilt trips. After a few legal processes, the issue was settled. When my mother realized she had no case, she simply dropped the whole affair. Since then, I have not heard from her. Not from Mark. Not from Lily. And honestly, it seems like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. For years, I allowed them to control my life via guilt and manipulation. But now, for the first time, I'm completely free. Looking back, I am glad I stood my ground. Yes, it was hard. It was difficult for me to leave my own family. But that was the correct thing to do. Family is meant to be about love and support, not about utilizing each other whenever it is convenient. I'm not sure what the future holds. But one thing is certain. I will never allow them back into my life. Not after all they've done. Do I wish that things had turned out differently? Of course. But, at the end of the day, you must maintain your peace. And sometimes that entails walking away, even from those who are meant to love you most. And that's fine. on my own terms. I'm moving forward. Am I the asshole for telling my trans friend she needs to disclose that she's trans to the man she's seeing? Using a throwaway account for this. I have a friend, known her for years. Since we were young and she was pre-transition. We're older now. She's had work done and been on hormones since she was a teen. If you met her, I can honestly tell you, you'd never guess she was trans. However, she does still currently have a penis. She tends to go with men who are fully aware she is trans. She had said that she was trans on her dating profile. She's moved away now. We still talk. She eventually told me she met a guy around 2 months ago. They're dating. She then went on to tell me that she met him on a new dating site she was trying out. I thought nothing more of it. The next day, she messaged me, and we were talking more about him. And then she told me some things, including that he has no idea that she's trans. She didn't disclose it on this new dating profile, and she just hasn't told him. I asked her why and also said, "Surely you've slept together?" No. She's often slept with men she's dated by now, so I just assumed. She said no, and that he's being patient on the sex. She's making him wait, but to keep him sweet. She's sucked his cock and given him handjobs a few times. I then just outright said, "You need to tell him," and she said I will, but I want him to fall for me a little more first. This isn't like her, and I was dumbfounded to be honest. I told her you can't wait for that. You need to tell him. Sooner rather than later, 2 months is already a while, and he may be disappointed or even get mad if he finds out. And she said, "Why would he be mad if he really likes me?" And I just said respectfully, "And I'm sorry, but you still currently have a penis." He's a totally straight man who thinks he's dating a biological woman. She didn't like me saying that. I get it, but I think it's important that she tell him. I tried to explain to her that this could also be dangerous for her and not telling him sooner. You never know how this guy might react. Not every man is so open to trying that out. Some men like strictly pussy, and it would appear that this guy thinks their pussy is waiting for him in her pants. She sent him underwear pics where she's tucked tightly. Honestly, you would never know. I think it's a dangerous game, and I told her that 2 months is too long, and I think she was silly to wait this long. But now she's freaked out and worried. AITA? I'm basically here seeking whether I was right or wrong in my brutal honesty. Am I the asshole for cutting ties with my dad after years of being blamed for my mom's death and refusing to pay his rent? Since the day I was born, my life has been challenging. You see, my mother died in the hospital while giving birth to me. After that, I was raised by my father, who somehow held me, a physical baby, responsible for his wife's premature passing. Not a day went by during my upbringing in our home without my dad reminding me, in his own cruel manner, that I was the reason my mother disappeared. He would never stop telling me that he never truly wanted me and that my birth had taken away the person he loved the most. He would remind me that I had to work hard and live up to the enormous price my life had paid. If not, my mother's passing would have been pointless. Hearing those cruel remarks as a child was terrible, as you may understand. I was too young to completely comprehend the intricacies of wrath, sorrow, and sadness. I also needed my mother, but she was no longer with me, and the only parent I had left acted as though I were the issue. Instead of protecting me, guiding me, and providing me with comfort, my father became the one who never stopped reminding me that I was not welcome in his life, and that my very presence was a curse. It was quite challenging to grow up in that setting. I frequently felt bad just for breathing and existing. At times, I longed to speak with him and express how wounded I was by his remarks and how they made me feel as though I didn't belong, even in my own house. But I didn't speak because of fear. I was greeted with greater resentment and rage the few times I tried to speak up. The outcome was a childhood characterized by a strong feeling of isolation and loneliness. I felt like I was always on edge, trying to prevent my dad from being even more resentful of me, while other children had parents that supported them, consoled them when they were depressed, and made them feel comfortable. The existence of so much resentment and hate toward that aspect of myself that I couldn't alter. The mere fact that I was alive was just as painful as the absence of love. I made an effort to comprehend my dad's suffering, in spite of everything. I was aware that Dad had been devastated by the loss of my mother, and that he had never really recovered. However, that didn't make it any simpler to live with the consequences of his statements. As a young child, I was attempting to figure out where I belonged, in a world that frequently seemed unfriendly and chilly. I still secretly yearned for his acceptance, love, and approval, in spite of all the hurt. Despite everything, I always hoped to somehow make my dad proud. Every time I brought home a report card with decent scores, I recall the excitement I felt, hoping that perhaps this time would be different. Excited to show him what I had done, I would approach him in the hopes of receiving a grin or a supportive remark, anything that would give me the impression that I was enough in his eyes. However, it was always the same. He would groan, hardly look at my grades, and advise me to keep working harder at my studies because they were still not good enough. He would argue that it wasn't a huge deal because hundreds of other children could receive the grades I did. I was greeted with disinterest and a continual reminder that I wasn't living up to his standards rather than pride or satisfaction. For him, no matter how good I performed, it was never enough. I was affected by his disapproval in areas other than academics. Every time I wanted to engage in extracurricular activities with my friends or play sports, he would quickly put an end to it. I was informed that my studies were the only thing I needed to concentrate on in order to leave his house as quickly as possible. I was reminded by those hurtful remarks that I was not a child to be cherished and cared for, but rather a burden. I didn't have the same parental support as my peers, who would talk about how their parents pushed them to pursue their interests and cherish their youth. I was always reminded that I was only a visitor to his home, and that I had to follow instructions or face expulsion. The weekends, which ought to have been spent unwinding or enjoying friends, were no exception. Even if all I wanted to do was go to the park or hang out at a friend's house, he would go on a tirade about how I was squandering his money if I ever asked to go out or spend time with my friends. He'd start a tirade about how hard he was working to pay for my education, and how I had no right to squander time or money on friendships. It seemed like he instinctively judged anything that made me happy or gave me a sense of normalcy to be trivial or undesirable. His reaction to my 15th birthday stands out as one of the most agonizing memories I have. For me, it was a day of dread. Yet most children anticipate their birthdays with joy, organizing parties or get-togethers with friends. He disliked me celebrating my birthdays every year, but I believed that year would be different. I wanted to get some pizza and watch a movie with my pals. He had a fuss when I eventually plucked up the nerve to approach him for money. He yelled at me, saying that since it was also the day my mother died, I had no right to enjoy the occasion. He made it plain to me that I should never even consider having a good time on my birthday, since it would always be the worst day of the year for him. I never celebrated with my pals because of this. As you might guess, I eventually learned from all of these situations that my dad obviously detested me and didn't want me around. I felt like I was always walking on thin ice, trying to avoid doing anything that would make him angry or disapprove as a result of the incessant rejection and criticism. I gradually discovered how to keep my aspirations to myself. I knew it would only result in disappointment and hurt, so I stopped looking to him for encouragement or acceptance. In order to get out of my dad's house, I put all of my effort into achieving good marks and did my best to be strong for myself. I eventually saw the results of all the effort, tenacity, and resolve I put into my studies. I still recall the day I was accepted to a prestigious institution with a full scholarship. It was a mixture of pride and relief. At last, I was leaving the house, escaping my father's controlling influence, and beginning a new phase of my life where I could live as I pleased. I felt as though a tremendous burden had been removed when I left home. I was genuinely free for the first time in my life. I had some of the best times of my life throughout those 4 years of college. It was a time of joy, progress, and self-discovery. I was able to experience all that had been out of my reach for so long and live like a typical young adult at last. Even though he made an effort to exert greater control over me from a distance, I stopped listening to my dad. I'd had enough of living under his rule. It was time for me to take charge of my life and create the life I want. Even with my newfound independence and the excitement of college life, I never lost sight of my objectives. I maintained my good marks because I was eager to take advantage of the chance I had worked so hard to obtain. However, I also made sure to have fun and take advantage of everything that college had to offer. I joined clubs, attended parties, made new friends, followed my interests, and at last began to live my life as I had always dreamed. I met Sheila, my girlfriend, about this time. One of the most amazing and surprising things that happened to me in college was meeting her. There was something about Sheila that captured my attention right away. We are both very similar in that we are driven, ambitious, and career-focused. Beyond that, though, our deeper connection was what truly set our relationship apart. No one else ever understood me the way Sheila did. The fact that we can sit together for hours on end without having to talk to each other is one of my favorite things about her. She lets me lose myself in my thoughts, which is really uncommon in relationships. I never feel under pressure to be someone else when I'm with Sheila. Whether we are sitting side by side, content in our solitude, or discussing our aspirations and ambitions, we appreciate each other's presence. For the first time in my life, Sheila gave me the genuine sense that I didn't need to bear the shame I had been carrying around for so long. She was able to see straight through the misery I had been experiencing, pain that had grown so pervasive in my life that I was virtually blind to its abnormality. Sheila emphasized how terribly incorrect it was for my father to hold me responsible for my mother's passing, and how no child should have to deal with that. She urged me to go to therapy, which I had never given much thought to before. I didn't even know there was a method to break free from my dad's influence, because his words were so embedded in my brain. One of the things that changed my life the most was going to therapy. At first, it was difficult since it required a lot of bravery and work to face the truth about my childhood, admit the trauma I had experienced, and learn how to destroy the harmful ideas I had internalized. However, therapy let me see things that nothing else had. It made it clear to me how faulty my dad's reasoning was and how much I was worthy of better. I gradually came to understand that my dad's resentment and rage were his problems, not mine, and that I wasn't responsible for my mother's passing. I saw that my anger toward my dad increased as I began to recover. It seemed as though all of the bitterness I had been harboring was at last emerging. For years, I had been carrying the guilt he had placed on me while attempting to gain his favor and be the child he desired me to be. However, I was now coming to the realization that I had nothing to do with that, and that he had unfairly and cruelly burdened me with his rage and anguish. I found it challenging to keep up any sort of contact with him during my time in college because of this rage. I rarely spoke with him, and when I did, it was tense and brief. I couldn't help but be resentful when I yelled at him, and I wasn't very patient when he tried to manipulate or be critical of me. I finally confronted him about everything at one point. It was a spontaneous outburst of repressed emotion and frustration rather than anything I had planned. I explained to him how his words and deeds had severely damaged my mental health throughout the years he had held me responsible for my mother's passing, and how I was determined to stop him from doing that to me. I made it plain that I was tired of being used as a scapegoat and that I was entitled to dignity and respect. If not, I would sever my relationship with him forever. This time, he had nothing to say. I had thought that he would apologize, but he didn't refute what I had said either. I observed a shift in my dad's interactions with me following that talk. Every time he spoke to me, he seemed to attempt to be kinder and less severe. He seemed to be trying to change, to be more sensitive to my emotions. However, our relationship remained tense in spite of this. A minor change in behavior was not enough to undo years of suffering and animosity. Although I was grateful for his attempt, it would take more than that to mend the relationship, if it could be restored at all, given the harm he had caused. Even while my connection with my dad remained strained over the years, I no longer felt the same kind of shame or rage. I've gradually realized that although I can't alter the past, I can manage how I allow it to impact the future. Sheila's encouragement and support have undoubtedly been crucial to this journey, and I am immensely appreciative of her for assisting me in realizing my worth as a person deserving of respect, love, and happiness. My dad recently married DEI, his lover, I chose to go to the modest private wedding with my girlfriend, Sheila, in spite of everything that had transpired between us over the years. As they embarked on this new phase of their lives together, we wanted to offer our support and best wishes. I was pleased for my father and believed that he may improve as a result of getting married. But my dad called me a month after they were married, seeming desperate. He was having financial difficulties as a result of some bad financial decisions. He informed me that he was facing eviction after failing to pay his rent for the previous 6 months. He claimed that he couldn't discuss this with his wife since it would cause them to argue. He asked me if I could pay his rent right now. As soon as I heard this, I declined. Given our complex past, I didn't want to be used as a financial safety net, even if I had the resources to do so. I didn't want to create a situation where he could come to me for financial support if things went wrong because I've worked hard to create the life I have. However, I began to feel bad after discussing it with Sheila. I couldn't get rid of the thought that perhaps I was being too severe, that perhaps he really needed assistance, and that he was still my father, in spite of everything. I then gave my dad a call back and suggested a middle ground. I informed him that since I lived alone in my house and had enough room for him and DEI, I would let them to remain with me temporarily, even if I wasn't willing to pay his rent, until they saved enough money to get back on their feet and locate a new place. I offered them they could stay at my house. Considering everything that had transpired between us in the past, it wasn't an easy decision, but I believed it was the right one. I made it apparent that this was only a short-term solution and that I wanted him to put in the effort to get back on his feet. After considering my offer for a while, my dad finally gave me a call and accepted the deal. He and DI moved in with me in 2 weeks, and I prepared a guest room for them. For us all, the first month or two was a time of transition. I hadn't lived with my dad for years, and we had changed significantly since then. I was no longer the adolescent who had to put up with his remarks in silence. I had my own life, rituals, and habits as an adult. Unfortunately, his previous patterns quickly reappeared. As though nothing had changed, my dad began making remarks about my habits and manner of life, including how I spent my time, maintained the house, and even handled my daily tasks. He seemed to have something to say all the time. However, I had changed from who I was before. I wasn't going to give him that much control over me this time. Every time he began to criticize me or try to dictate how I lived my life, I would tell him to stop. I would make it plain that, particularly while residing under my roof, he had no right to criticize my decisions. I was forceful, but I wasn't impolite. I refused to let him tell me how I should live any longer. Naturally, his wife, Day, was not pleased with this. She said a few times that I should respect my father. She would explain to me how much he had given up. Since I knew the truth about him, and she obviously didn't know about half of the things he had done to me as a youngster, I would just shake my head. Although I respected my father, I wasn't going to let him control me or override my decisions. I wasn't going to repeat the cycle of sacrificing my happiness to satisfy my father, something I had done for far too long. Nevertheless, I would simply remain silent anytime they made those comments because it wasn't my place to tell her the truth about my dad. There was no point in arguing about it. Although I was aware that cohabitation would be difficult, I thought that eventually we could all figure out how to get along without too much conflict. However, one evening after a particularly demanding workday, I returned home to discover my dad and his wife watching TV in the living room. The kitchen was overflowing with dishes, and the house was a complete disaster. Since I had frequently reminded my dad and his wife that they needed to do their fair share of the housework and that it was his day to clean, I questioned him about why he hadn't done it. "You know," Dad began in that tone that always made me tense. "You're a grown-up who I raised all by myself after your mother died. Asking me to perform additional work for you at this age should make you feel embarrassed. You're capable of doing the dishwashing yourself." Hearing such statements infuriated me so much that I retorted, "You know what's truly embarrassing? The fact that you were the one who pleaded with me to move in for free, and now you're sitting here on my couch, in my home, eating my food, watching my TV, and giving me directions. This entire time, neither you nor your wife have offered me any assistance. You know what? You can just pack your bags and depart at any time if you don't feel like doing the dishes. My father simply looked at me, surprised by how strongly I had responded. For an instant, I feared he may actually stand up and storm out of the tense quiet. But knowing that he had nowhere to go, I turned and left the room, slamming the kitchen door behind me as my heart raced with impatience and rage. When I came downstairs, the following morning, DEI and I were by ourselves in the kitchen. It's likely that my dad left early for work. DEI asked if she could speak with me as I was ready to leave the kitchen. I decided to sit down and listen, even though I wasn't totally sure what to anticipate. Dunmo looked serious as she started to explain to me how upset my dad was following our talk the night before. She claimed that given the amount of money he had allegedly spent to assist me in purchasing my home, I had no right to treat him in that manner. My dad hadn't provided me with any financial support since I left for college, so I was understandably shocked. I had saved hard for years to purchase this house with my own funds. The assertion that he had made a substantial contribution to my acquisition was wholly untrue. When I asked DEI what she meant, she clarified that my dad had told her that he had contributed to my property purchase by using some of his savings. It seemed almost funny to me that this was the story my dad had given her, and it was like a light bulb going out. DEI persisted in saying that I should be thankful for the assistance my dad had allegedly provided me before I could reply. She believed that since he was having financial difficulties, it was only right that I begin paying him back some of that money by housing them while they were living with me. She argued that since this was essentially my dad's house as well, it was the least I could do in light of the alleged financial sacrifices my dad had made for me. I couldn't help but giggle at DEI as I continued to stare at her face. I mean, I couldn't take it seriously because it was all so ridiculous. When I eventually stopped laughing, I told her the truth. My dad hadn't paid $1, and I was the real owner of the house. Her expression was priceless. She was obviously unaware that I was the owner of the house, and she must have been overcome with shame and rage. In response to her question about whether or not my dad had ever assisted me, I explained that he didn't even have enough money to cover his own rent. So how could he ever afford to buy my house? She didn't protest much after our conversation, so I assume she saw the truth too. Shortly thereafter, though, she gathered her belongings and departed from my home that same day. Since it was none of my business, I didn't stop her. When my dad returned home later that night, he contacted DEI and asked her why her belongings were gone. He began blaming me for speaking out after he learned that I had told her the truth about who owned the house. He claimed that by disclosing the truth, I purposefully ruined his marriage and caused his wife discomfort. He claims that since he now felt inferior to me, and that it was somehow my responsibility that he couldn't afford a house of his own, I ought to have been more understanding and allowed her to believe his lie. It was unbelievably frustrating. I made it clear to him that I was offering them my house in order to help them, and instead of receiving appreciation, I was being held responsible for their issues. My dad seemed to have forgotten that I owed him nothing, and that he was the only one at fault in this situation. Even as an adult, he was attempting to use me as a scapegoat for something that wasn't my fault, as if all the years of him treating me like I was the issue had suddenly returned. He refused to listen, though. He didn't see my point of view and demanded that I call DEI to apologize and make things right by lying, giving her the impression that he had assisted me in some way when I bought this place. I said that I would not tell his wife a falsehood on his behalf. The continual manipulation and finger-pointing had worn me out, and I had. My mental health was beginning to suffer as a result of my dad's continual arguments with me, so I finally told him that I could no longer bear his presence. I requested that he get his belongings and vacate by the next day. I took the painful decision, but in order to preserve my own tranquility and sanity, I had to set and uphold boundaries. My dad argued that he had nowhere to go and begged for more time, but I was too upset at the time to give a damn about his predicament or his justifications. The following morning, I enforced my choice and forced my dad to vacate. Since DEI won't talk to him, my dad has been contacting me to whine about how I have destroyed his marriage and his life. He claims that a good son would never have ejected their parents and continuously blaming me for Daeyi's current situation. Update 1. I'm relieved that everyone is aware of the immense trauma my dad has caused me over the years. Many people have suggested that I get in touch with DEI and tell her the truth about my early years, because she could not be completely aware of my dad's true identity. I've stayed out in his affairs up until now, but I think it's crucial that she understands the truth, because he may have misled her about other matters. I'm going to get in touch with her and speak with her directly. Update 2. A week has passed since my last update. DEI and I finally got a chance to sit down and talk about everything. As it happens, she was unaware of the type of upbringing I experienced. I told her about my emotional trauma, blame, and the effects it had on me. She appeared astonished and acknowledged that Dad had presented a very different image of himself, suggesting that he was a struggling single parent who had given up everything for his child. I was so shocked that I had to shake my head. I told tales of my early years and how I was always held responsible for my mother's death. She conveyed her understanding and concern. I then told her how fortunate I was to get a well-paying career and how hard I had fought to establish myself during college. I was able to move into my own place and save money as a result. I explained to her that I didn't enjoy my father controlling everything around my house because, as a child, he never let me be who I was. DEI recognized my suffering. She then disclosed that Dad had lost all of his money as a result of gambling, and she hadn't told me about it before as he wanted to hide it and was too embarrassed about it. She clarified that she had flatly rejected my dad's initial offer to move in with me. She didn't feel comfortable living with me, so I suppose that's why my dad lied to her and said that he had helped pay for my house, which made her feel less bad about accepting the offer to remain with us. She was upset, though, when she subsequently learned from me that his claims of helping with my house were completely false and really another ploy to achieve what he wanted. She went on to express her embarrassment at having to ask me for rent that day. I informed her that Dad was solely responsible for his falsehoods and that it wasn't her fault. Dee told me as we were leaving that she intended to take some time away from Dad to think about their relationship after our talk. Update 3. Hello, everyone. I am aware that it has been 3 months since I last made any updates to this page. Since I requested my dad to move out, I have severed all ties with him. Although it hasn't been a simple decision, it is essential for my emotional and mental well-being. He tried to point the finger at me for everything the last time we spoke, but I stopped talking to him. I simply blocked him right away. I must say that I've been feeling a lot better ever since. I feel relieved and more clear-headed now that the pressure and manipulation have subsided. I feel as though my privacy and tranquility have finally returned. Sheila, my girlfriend, has been really helpful during this process. She has supported me, helped me process my feelings, and offered consolation and encouragement. Her assistance has had a significant impact, and I am truly appreciative of her. I'm gradually discovering a new sense of security and contentment, now that my dad is no longer involved and Sheila is by my side. I'm concentrating on creating the life I desire, working for my objectives, and appreciating the good things in my relationship. Am I the asshole for altering my cousin's wedding dress after she gave it to me, then uninviting her from my wedding after she got upset about the changes? Original post. I, 18M. Getting married in the October to my boyfriend, 19M. We're planning on a smaller scale wedding with mostly just friends and family, and considering that we both have large extended families, it was definitely a challenge planning for that many people. For a general idea of how big my family is, just my mom has 7 siblings who all have children of their own. With our small budget, I was looking at redesigning or upcycling a wedding gown instead of having to devote a huge amount of money towards a brand new dress. I mentioned my plans to a couple people and was in the process of looking at options when my mom's oldest sister's daughter, my cousin, reached out to me. Megan, 40F, got married in 2015. The marriage didn't last very long and they got divorced soon after. I barely remember the husband, as he never came to family gatherings and Megan and my mom aren't particularly close. So I was surprised she was offering something so important after a long time of distance. Regardless, Megan had offered to give me her wedding dress as it was my size, and she knew we were trying to avoid spending a crazy amount on a small budget. I loved the idea, and the dress was beautiful. I did make sure she was comfortable giving it to me rather than loaning it, and she assured me that it held no emotional significance, and she couldn't care less if she didn't have to hang on to it. I thanked her and took home the dress. One thing about me, however, is that I am a very chaotic seamstress, and I make the majority of my own clothes. And while I did love the original dress, I wanted to make some small changes to the hem and neckline to fit the theme better. The original dress was super full, skirted with a long hem, and since my wedding is outside, I wanted to make sure it wouldn't be dragging in the dirt. So I took some layers off the underside, removed the trim, and removed the sleeves to tighten the bodice. I was so happy with how it turned out, and my mom and friends agreed that it was perfect. Here's when the trouble started. My mom had taken a picture of me trying on the dress and decided to send Megan a picture alongside another thank you. However, she responded with a cold comment over text and called me later that night. She said that I should have asked her permission before ruining her dress, and that if I had thought it was so ugly before, I should have bought my own. I tried to explain that the changes I made were small, and that I did ask before I took it if she wanted it back afterwards. She blew up at me saying that it was too different, and that she could never wear it again, even though she never gave the impression that she wanted to. Megan has already started before that she has no interest in getting remarried ever. I asked what she wanted me to do, and she snapped at me that it was too late. She hung up and has apparently been telling people I slutted out her wedding dress and made sure I would embarrass her by outdoing the original dress. I don't know what to do about it. The wedding is way too close to consider making myself a dress, and I have my heart set on having something unique and personal for my wedding. Her mother called both me and my mom saying I should have asked, that I am a spoiled brat for taking advantage of Megan's kindness and generosity. My parents and a few family members who I've told think I should uninvite Megan and just wear the dress. But my aunt is saying I would break Megan's heart unless I find something else. Should I give up on my dress and see what else there is? To provide some context and answer some questions, Megan and I are not super close. From both the age gap and different lifestyles. Megan is the third cousin out of 21. I am the ninth. Megan, being the first girl child in the family, grew up with a lot of expectations and pressure, and ended up marrying a very religious and controlling husband. After her divorce, Megan went through what can best be described as a breakthrough and reevaluation of her life and ambitions. Since then, she has completely changed her job, appearance, and opinions. She is no longer an active member in family events and only takes part in important ones like birthdays, funerals, and weddings. Despite this, we have never had any problems between us, and our interactions have always been civil and kind. Secondly, the alterations I did were only limited to the skirt and bodice. The slotted out comment apparently stemmed from my removal of the sleeves, turning it to a sleeveless top, and raising the hem to a T-length. My ankles are exposed now. Someone had pointed out to me that Megan's anger was a product of her own self-esteem, as she has naturally grown and gained weight since then, which I could definitely see even though she is still beautiful. And thirdly, I am definitely planning on regular updates if any more incidents happen up to the wedding, and a full breakdown with photos after the ceremony. Thank you to everyone for their kind messages and loving support. You've all made me feel so much better, and I appreciate you taking the time to comment. Update. As of yesterday, I found out from my fiancé that Megan had reached out to him with false concern about how my home-style dress gave the wrong idea about our wedding, and had the audacity to ask him, the man I've been in love with for nearly 3 years, if he was sure he wanted to marry a woman who wouldn't put in the effort of getting a proper dress. She says this is, if I hadn't spent weeks sewing the dress to make sure it was perfect. Thank goodness my fiancé wasn't upset by her attitude, and responded that I had put way more effort into the dress than she put into her marriage. And that shut her up real fast. She turned around, and apparently has been crying to my elderly grandparents, her mother, some of the other cousins, etc., that I'm a trashy whore with a cheap shotgun wedding. I'm not even pregnant, LMAO, with a fiance who is only interested in our family's money. My fiance is a mechanic, and regardless of the fact that he is doing really well and makes a pretty good salary, she still seems to think he's beneath her. Some of my older cousins, the ones I don't talk to as much, have actually expressed concern about whether or not they want to go to the ceremony at all. I blame my aunt for spreading misinformation, which I managed to assure them wasn't true. After all of this, I reached out to Megan saying that, because of all her comments and insults, she is no longer invited to the wedding. I admitted that I was sorry for the situation, but I can't keep pardoning her rude comments on what is supposed to be a happy time in my life. She snapped that she wouldn't show her face at my pathetic excuse for a wedding, and that she can't wait to see how I act when he leaves me. Overall, I am pretty confident that Megan and I's relationship might not recover. But at this point, I don't regret anything. Here's hoping everything else cools down in the next couple weeks, and I can go into our day with no negativity at all. Am I the asshole for altering my cousin's hand-me-down wedding dress after she told me I could have it? Top comments. Commenter 1. Wear the dress. Invite the cousin. Use the pieces of the dress to make a decorative pillow for your rings and present it to her at the reception as the best cousin ever for gifting you the dress. It will be a public moment, and you will never hear about it again. Commenter 2. Totally no TA. Your mom blew it by taking photos and posting. That was unfortunate. Issue 1. Issue 2. Do you have that text or email agreement, paper trail, of her IDC about the dress convo that you can refer back to? Sorry that you're going through this. This isn't something any soon-to-be bride needs to deal with. Truly, sounds like she was more emotionally connected to that dress than she thought. There's nothing you can do at this point other than add a note of appreciation of her selfless offering of the dress. Don't uninvite her. Just make sure one of your MOA are watching her on your day. Commenter 3. TA. If your cousin didn't want it changed, she should have said, "Don't make any alterations." It sounds like you made some sensible changes. Don't let her ruin your day. Commenter 4. Your cousin specifically told you that she was giving you the dress, and she didn't want it back. So now you are the owner of the dress. You can make any changes you want to it. She can't come back later and attach conditions to the gift. It's your dress, OP. You should wear it. Let aunt and cousin know that you will be wearing the dress, and they are welcome to attend. But you understand if that's too much for them. Update. Hi everyone. I made a post on this subreddit a few months ago about my 18F wedding dress and all the surrounding drama that came from it. I had been given my 40 cousin's old wedding dress from a failed marriage and altered it to better fit the needs of my ceremony and my style. She did not appreciate the changes and became very rude and hurtful. My wedding was 6 days ago, and I was asked to do an update, and I am happy to share how it all went down. I am still so happy how my dress turned out and was very glad to have shortened the train, as there had been rain the night before and morning dew on the grass. The shorter hemline saved me a lot of mess and damage in the long run. Plus, I felt beautiful, and it made such a special day all the more amazing. I had told my cousin Megan that her behavior was rude and unnecessary, and that I did not want her bringing her unpleasantness to my day. However, her mother, who had been one of her primary supporters, had apologized in order to go to the ceremony. So while Megan herself was not actually at the wedding, I had not completely excluded the issue. Megan's mother, 71 F, my aunt, is your basic senior white woman, and usually expresses her opinions in a loud and unspoken manner. So I was uneasy in the beginning when she arrived. She didn't make a fuss throughout the ceremony though, and everything went smoothly. I sneezed while walking down the aisle, but that wasn't anyone's fault in particular. The reception was at an outdoor garden where we had set up under a gazebo, with a temporary floor for tables and eventually dancing, with a slightly elevated platform for the big table in speeches. This is where my aunt decided to make sure everyone knew about her daughter's dress. After a few speeches, following my friend's champagne rendition of That Time We Went Camping, and the tent slid down a hill, she made her way up to the podium. She started her speech in the usual unassuming way, congratulating us and remarking on how far we've come as people. Unfortunately, she decided to tie this statement into a comment of, You've even made your own dress. I mean, not really, actually. It was Megan's first. She then went on into how she remembered shopping for the dress with Megan for her own wedding, and going on and on about how it was perfect and made for her. At this point in the speech, I was just staring at her in confusion while my husband and everyone else just sat there awkwardly waiting for her to be done. She finished her speech with a half-assed backtrack to me looking lovely and wishing us good luck on our marriage. She mumbled back to her seat and let the ceremony keep going, looking entirely too proud of herself. Other than that, the only other trouble she caused was her apparently showing everyone she could manage a photo of the original, which is really not that bad in the grand scheme of things. I am so happy that my family and friends were able to be there and celebrate with us, and can't wait to see what comes for us next. Thank you again to everyone who commented and reassured me in the beginning. You've all been so kind. Who knows? I might even dye the dress another color and keep it around just in case an appropriate event comes up. Relevant comments. Commenter 1. When you got the dress, did you get permission to alter it? Perhaps there might have been an expectation for it to go back to her when you were done with it. I did. I mentioned in my original post that I had asked specifically if it was mine to keep, and she agreed. That was a big worry of mine in the first place, but she told me she had no attachments to it. Commenter 2. You should reach out to your aunt and thank her for making a speech showing her support of you and your marriage. You got so many compliments on the work you did to the dress after she pointed out that you did all that yourself. Everyone was super impressed by the before and after pictures, so you wanted to give her a personal thank you. I think that they would have made comments about it being cousin's dress and shown pictures if you didn't make adjustments. So I think you picked the better path. Commenter 3. Once someone gives you something, it is yours to do with as you wish. If she didn't want you to alter it in any way, she should have put that condition on the give. Then that way, you could have refused it, since it wasn't as you imagined your dress to be. You weren't wrong, and your aunt and cousin need to suck it up and never mention it again.